This quick little warm up for you on solving quadratics. You need to make sure before you take your assessment on solving quadratics that you understand how you're going to approach these equations. Okay, so we know two methods, square root method, and we know factoring. So you must factor if you see a squared term and an x term. Okay, so we must factor this, and to factor we must have 0 on one side. So the first move I must do is to bring this 32 over to the other side and by subtracting. Okay, now I promise you once you do this it will be very easy to factor. Right now we're only doing easy factoring from algebra 1. To factor this, it's two sets of parentheses. We're locked in at x and x. Since this is a negative 32, one sign has to be a plus sign, the other sign has to be a minus sign. And then we have to know our times tables. We have to sit here and think of ways of getting negative 32, but it has to add up to a negative 4. And so while I was talking, my brain was working in the background, and I know the combination. So I know it's 8 times 4, okay? And for it to agree with this negative 4, I must have the 8 next to the minus. I must have the 4 next to the plus, so that when you do FOIL, we talked about FOIL, how to properly multiply this. X times x, hey, there's the x squared. My outers is a negative 8x. X times negative 8 is negative 8x. Inside here, when you distribute the 4 to the x, it's a 4x. Together, though, it adds up to the negative 4x. And finally, 4 times negative 8 is negative 32. Okay, so you don't want to stop here after factoring. I want to see the factors on your assessment, but then your answers are what make this 0. So each factor is 0. So x plus 4, obviously it's a negative 4. That's going to turn it into 0. And in this factor, it's going to be a positive 8. Okay? And then one last thing you can do is, you have time, you can quickly go to your y equals screen for these factoring problems and type in what is equal to 0. So in this case, it was x squared minus 4x minus 32. Okay? And when you hit graph, these are called zeros. Okay? It's crossing at negative 4. Hey, there's my negative 4. It's crossing at positive 8. Okay? So that's as hard as it gets when it comes to simple factoring. Okay? Now this next one, I don't want to factor. I can't factor. The good news is it just has an x squared term. Okay, so we want to undo. So don't confuse the two methods. I need to get x squared all by itself. Okay, so I'm just going to take negative 184 and I'm going to subtract 12. And we're going to get 196. We're going to have to divide by 2. When you divide by 2, you're going to get negative 98. Okay? And then your last move is to take the square root. Okay, now here we know it's going to be imaginary. So remember, plus or minus. The moment you take the square root, you have a positive answer, you have a negative answer. And in this case, it is going to be imaginary. So I know it's going to be an I because there's a negative underneath my square root. And then I also need to make sure you can simplify it. So if you look at the sideboard where I have list of perfect squares, when it comes to a 98, I can break up 98 as 49 times 2. Okay, now I knew that, but you would have to go through and think of ways that you can get that value. Okay, so I promise you if you can simplify it, not every number can be simplified, but it'll be pretty obvious which of the numbers on the sideboard can fit evenly into the number. So your final answer, I'm going to turn this I into a 7. So I'm going to have set plus or minus 7, then I'm going to put the I, and then root 2. That's your answer. I took the square root of 49, it becomes a regular 7. The I was because of the negative, and this root 2 stays root 2. Okay? And then this one, when you see something squared like this, we have to do the square root method, but we're going to take the square root earlier in the process. So I still need to get rid of this plus 9. So anything that would be on the outside, we need to undo. So I'm just simply going to subtract the 9, and I'm left with 3x minus 5 squared equals, and then 58 minus 9, I should be able to do that in my head. It's a nice 49. And then here's where we have to take the square root. Okay, so right now at this step, we're taking the square root. The good news is we know the square root of 49. By taking the square root, it gets rid of the parentheses in the square, so you're still left with 3x minus 5, but we must put plus or minus 7 right there. Okay, so at this point, when we take the square root, two answers, but then we still need to solve for x. So to solve for x, we have two moves. We have to add a 5, and then we have to divide by 3. Okay, so then it's your job to calculate. First time, use a positive 7. So positive 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 divided by 3 is going to be a nice 4. Okay? And then negative 7 plus 5 is going to be a negative 2. And then when you divide, you get negative 2/3. Okay? So, again, for these type of problems, it's hard to avoid fractions, so we just have to get used to them. But that covers all the type of quadratic equations that you're responsible to know how to solve. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully with the practice and looking back at your notes, do the practice assessment, you're going to be more than ready for this next assessment on quadratics. Thanks for watching. Take care.